Cornell Belcher is the president of Brilliant Corners Research and Strategies, and he is one of the premier strategists in national progressive politics, as well as in the rebranding of corporate America. He's a former political contributor to the competition CNN, having provided political analysis for them for 6 years. And Cornell served as a pollster for the Democratic National Committee and for both Barack Obama presidential campaigns. And over the years, Cornell has worked with both the Senate and House Democrats as senior political advisor to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, and they're going to have an interesting year this year, in the 2002 cycle, and as well as a special projects director for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee for the 2000 cycle, and he also served as Women Vote Coordinator for Emily's List in '98, helping put together communication and GOTV operations targeting women voters all over the country. And you didn't think he was old enough to have even had a job in 1998. Cornell Belcher, everyone. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I feel honored to be in a room with such big and weighty folks. I'm sitting at the table with Professor Dawson and listening. I'm like, why am I in this room? As a political hack, you're probably saying, why is he in this room? But today I'm not coming to you as a partisan. I'm coming to you as a concerned American. And it's interesting that racism popped up so high in the word cloud. By the way, I love word clouds. Because some of what we're going to talk about today is the old ghosts that are still haunting our politics and therefore our policies. And I unfortunately don't have. I have some. There's some sobering up that needs to happen. And by the way, later on in the ratings and for the polls, when they ask about speakers, please rate me very favorable. Okay. So I was, and I don't have 15 minutes. So I'm gonna go quickly. Beverly, she's. I was in Paris shortly after the 2008 election, doing a training and speaking thing over there, when I found out America was post-racial. All the French were coming up after our conversations about the American election and talking about how America was clearly, post-racial and what this would mean to policies and our politics and our country going forward. And then there was all this conversation here about how America was becoming post-racial, which I thought was a fascinating conversation. Racial aversion, we're not post-racial. Racial aversion is still very much a part of our American political and therefore policy landscape. And the quote by Du Bois is as true today as it was then. I'm going to walk you through some data and talk about sort of how this polarization is playing out in our electorate, and frankly, talk a little bit about the challenges that we have to face and we have to fix in order to win the future. Now, you would think that from the narrative out there that Obama won an election because in fact he had broken new ground, and this was part of the ideal of post-racial. Now, I was a fellow at Harvard last semester, which I always think is funny because I couldn't get it in Harvard, but now I was a fellow at Harvard. No offense to any of you Harvard graduates, but I'm just a public school boy. But I could almost teach a whole semester on this graph alone, which is one of my favorite graphics. Now, LBJ signed the Civil Rights, and this is white voting patterns over the years, red Republican, blue Democrat. Now, something interesting happened. LBJ signed the civil rights legislation, and LBJ courageously signed the civil rights legislation because he said, there goes the South. What LBJ really could have said was, there goes the white vote. LBJ was a Southerner, although we Virginians don't really consider Texas South. He was more of the West, Southwest. But he was a Southerner, and he got what what politically he was doing. He said, "There goes the South," and he thought, Democrats are now going to lose the South for maybe a decade. What he didn't understand was the ripples would reach much further than the South, and quite frankly, much further out in time. And by the way, I want to look at these numbers, and we make no value judgments because we have to solve for some of this polarization. LBJ didn't change education policy, didn't change economic policy. Civil rights legislation realigned the parties. Democrats have not won white voters since LBJ signed the civil rights legislation. That seminal moment changed the trajectory. Now, Democrats have historically done very well when they get 46% of the white vote, and they got it at historical low time for the Republican brand after Watergate. And Bill Clinton, and a long losing streak. Bill Clinton got 46% the second time around, and again, as an incumbent, did very well. Now, you would think that over time, this would be shrinking, right? You would think that over time, this polarization that was set off by LBJ would be shrinking. Truth of the matter is, as you can see, it's growing. And it's getting, that polarization around both lines is actually growing. We've made a lot of progress in this world, in this country. We can talk about it. But along political lines, we are as polarized, arguably more polarized today than we have been in a long, long time. So, how did and some of that has to do with demographics, and we'll talk about that.
The number is that? Would you mind going back?
Yeah.
So does that simply mean that the 60% of the Republicans got 60% of the white vote? And
Yes.
The Democrats got 38% of the white vote. Is that what that number means?
Yes, 38%. So over time, we have not been growing less polarized along this line. We're actually growing more polarized along this line, and how that triggers our politics. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a second. And then I'm being rude to the people on the other side of the room. And how does, in fact, what Obama has done, this breakthrough, really showcase for us? Actually, Elaine Beverly's actually the fault of a lot of this because she helped get Obama elected. So I blame you for a lot of this. Over time, we didn't really talk about race in the 2008 campaign, but yeah, we did some polling around it. And I've actually I've been doing, polling around that, going back to pre the election and coming into this election, because it's going to be the foundation of a book that I hope to get out this summer around racial aversion and racial aversion in our electorate. But needless to say, that aversion measurement has been growing. Now we're going to do a bookend poll here shortly to see how that aversion is growing and popping. We are not becoming less racially averse, but in many ways we're becoming more racially averse, and our politics are falling along those lines. Now, how does this impact our politics? How does it change our politics? Changing the face of the electorate. One of the incredible things about the election of the first non-white male to the presidency was, to a certain extent, well, not to a certain extent, to a great extent, it captured the demographic changes and shifts that are happening in this country. And when you look, 11% of our voters in 2008 were new voters. Now, for people in political space to understand, to get 11% growth in the electorate is a big deal because it never happens. But we also knew from the Obama campaign that Obama doesn't become president. He doesn't even win the primary if, in fact, we don't change the face of the electorate and make the American electorate, more in line with the changing demographics of this country. So, of the new voters, and the graph on the far left voted before. That's those who've been voted before, and the graph on the right of that 11%, that new electorate, much browner than the electorate before it. And by the way, without that 11%, Barack Obama's not president. So browner, but also younger. So you have a browner, younger electorate making up the 11%, that new electorate, changing the face of American politics. The speaker after me is going to go into greater detail about the demographic changes that you're seeing in the country. But clearly we are seeing demographic changes in the country, and it's not even about where we get to majority minority. Right now it is where we're coming close to a third or more than a third. The impact of some of this change in our politics and therefore in our policies. This is a map of when America was great. In a real way, what does this demographic change mean? This was Reagan's coalition in 1980, where Reagan had a landslide. Reagan had a landslide at 57% of the white vote. Won every state except for 4. Complete domination of the landscape. This is when America's not so great. See that? Not so great. Great. Not so great. This in our politics, in our electoral politics, this is what the demographic changes mean. 5 minutes. This is what the demographic changes mean. Where Romney actually bested bested Ronald Reagan's number, but demographically, in a real way, this is what the shifts in demographics have meant. And it doesn't mean that blacks and whites have grown closer together politically. It is that, quite frankly, we're still losing white voters in Virginia by 20 plus points. But the changes in the demographics have made this map possible. Not because we've made great inroads in how whites and blacks and even white and brown people think politically are coming closer together or voting closer together. In some conversations, look, we are dividing along 2 tribes. We are tribal America. And arguably you can't win the future that way. And particularly when you look at parts of the South, where that demographic change is going to be realized much, much sooner than it is overall nationally. In a state like Georgia, that a lot of folks are saying should be a battleground state, more competitive state. That demographic change is going to happen much more quickly. And look, it's not even about when you get to 50 majority minority. It's when you get to 34, 35%. But at the same time, what has happened? Now, this is a kind of, well, you all are smart people in the room. You deal with numbers all the time. What the bar in the middle, the black bar, shows is the percentage of the minority vote. Now, once upon a time, Democrats actually won states in Georgia. But a peculiar thing has been happening. As the number of minorities in the state rises, so does the racial polarization along political lines. And that's true in Georgia, it's true in Florida, it's true across the landscape, particularly in the South. Our politics is very polarized and very tribal, and it's only going to grow worse. So what you saw last night on the stage, arguably, and again, I'm not putting a value judgment on it, but as we grow more polarized, not less polarized, this has impacts for the future, and I think grows problematic for our country for solving problems, particularly in urban areas. I know I'm running out of time. Last graph. This is a polling question, and what are sort of the implications of this divisive politics in a real world way? In a real world way, and this is from a polling question we asked in a Hispanic poll, last month, I think, in a real world way. And actually, it was just after the Terrorist Act, I think, in California. In a real world way, we are now seeing an environment where this xenophobia and this polarization and this political conversation that we're having right now is just as threatening to Hispanic or Latino Americans as the ideal of terrorism is, as they're equally divided, which blows my mind that we have so many Americans growing uncomfortable in their own country because of this polarization. It is something that we have to solve for, and it's something that we don't win the future if we continue along these tribal polar lines, because our politics is broken now. Imagine how broken it's going to be if we don't try to solve for some of this over the next decade, and those polarization lines continue to grow. So, to me, it's not even about a Democrat-Republican thing, but it's about an American thing, because we as America, we have to solve for this polarization in our policies and our politics, or it's hard to see how we win the future with this broken politics. I now am out of time, and I thank you.